Welcome, everybody, to episode number 7 of Aquarium Apologetics, where Chloe asks the tough questions and I try not to blow it. So, Chloe, what is the question you have for me tonight?
So in the story of Jonah, when he was on his way to Tarshish, the big storm came, and Jonah said, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will grow calm." Was it?
Huh?
Did God tell him to say that, or did he just think of it that way, or did he just predict that God was gonna do something with the sea with him?
Let's look up the account. Let's
Just
read.
why did he think of that so quickly?
Well, let's take a look and see here. It says, Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, Why have you done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. This is reading in verse 10 of chapter 1. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you, that the sea may be calm for us? For the sea was growing more tempestuous. And he said to them, Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you. For I knew that this great tempest is because of me. Um, Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not, for the sea continued to grow more tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried out to the Lord and said, We pray, O Lord, please do not let us perish for this man's life, and do not charge us with innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly and offered a sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. Okay, so your question is, how did Jonah know that the wind would be, or that the seas would be calmed, right?
Just because he would be thrown into. It's kind of like, why did Jonah think of saying, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea" so quickly?
Well, we don't know that he did it quickly because the account doesn't say how long the storm was raging. Um,
I mean, not quickly, but said that right away instead of
Roll harder. Well, first of all, we know that Jonah was a prophet, and prophets get direct revelation from God. So it is quite likely, although the text doesn't say this, that Jonah, because he knew God told him to go to Nineveh to preach, and he knew he was in disobedience, therefore he knew he was sinning against God. Okay? So even if God didn't tell him, well, hey, have him throw you overboard, and then the sea will become calm. He knew he was in sin against God. He knew he was in disobedience. So he might have just figured, well, throw me into the sea. Now, the question is here was Jonah even taking it a step further and saying, if I'm thrown into the sea and I drown, then I really don't have to do what God was telling me. You know? Or why didn't he just jump overboard himself?
yeah.
Maybe it's because he knew that suicide would be a sin, and but although he was already in sin against God, so there's a lot that we can extrapolate from the text. But the bottom line is, we don't know why. We do know Jonah was a prophet. God told him to do something. He was in rebellion against God and disobedience, not doing it. He was thrown overboard, and the sea was calmed. Now, here's an example of God in his sovereignty, or God being set apart and otherly, um, used this event for the men on this ship. So they did it. Because he told them before he got on the ship that he was a prophet of God, that he fears the Lord, and so they picked him up and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from raging. So right away it stopped, it says in verse 15. And then it says in verse 16, Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. When they took vows, that's probably saying They were vowing that they were going to serve him, that God was now their Lord. Okay? So God
Since
used
it said earlier that they each cried out to his own God.
exactly. Exactly. So now they turned from their idolatry. They used the situation. God used Jonah in this situation to save the men on this boat. So
So
there you
that's why.
go. So there were. It's obviously there's a lot of layers to the onion there. There's a lot more we could get into, but the best way to answer your question is to say that we don't know, but we know the result is that he ended up obeying God ultimately, preaching to Nineveh. Nineveh repented. In his disobedience, God used his sin to save other men. So there's the way to, God can use our sin in a sinless way for his glory, as he did with Jonah here. So there you go. Oh, you're sweet. Look it. She's sweet, not crazy. That's refreshing. So that is the conclusion of episode 6 of Aquarium Apologetics. Bye bye.